Welcome, everybody. My name's Eli Steenledge. I'm the Director of Communications at Nehemiah. And, yeah, there you go. Yeah. All right, and we have been enjoying music by Mitch on piano. Yeah. And Joseph on drums. Yeah, so we'll be pausing throughout the evening to kind of hear more of their music, and then if you want to, after all of our storytellers, they're going to be staying around to play some more music. So hang around for that if you just want to enjoy the evening a little bit more and talk with others. So I mentioned that I'm a filmmaker, and I just wanted to talk about real quick how I met Dr. G. My friend Jeremy Halliday, who's here, you'll hear from him later also reading some of these answers. But so we make films together, and we had done a couple short films in the past, and they were just sort of fun little things, but we thought we wanted to go and do something a little bit deeper that had a little more personal angles to them. So we were looking for an idea to do that, and we had another friend who did spoken word, and he had this poem that dealt with race. So we were looking for a visual to go with the spoken word poem. Jeremy told me about the Justified Anger article that had come out, so most of you have probably read that. And I was new to Madison at the time, so I wasn't familiar. But we set up a meeting with Dr. G in his office, and so these three white guys sit down in front of him, and our plan is to ask him to use his story of being pulled over in his own church's parking lot, right? So we want to use this for our spoken word piece. And we can tell, after a little while, Dr. G's a little hesitant about these, sort of passionate white guys coming in to use that. So he's kind of asking us some questions. I remember the first one was, how many black people do you actually know in Madison? Fortunately, I didn't say the things that were running in my head, like, yeah, I've had black friends. I can tell you their names, right? I can tell you. We stayed quiet, so and we took that as like, yep, don't know a lot of black people. So he said maybe you should start there, and that point was well taken, and we did warm up in that meeting. We joked about over stand-up comedians we liked and things like that. But it struck me, I was actually having a conversation a few weeks back with one of our storytellers, Brittany Lee, who you'll hear from later, and she was talking about what it means to ask people for their stories, and what stories mean to them personally. And she was talking specifically about, people have been through the criminal justice system and things, and really just asking them where they're coming from. But I was kind of saying, like, how do you have to be sensitive about that? And she was saying, yes, because people's stories are something that they own, right? Like, we can't have ownership of other people's stories that are personal to them. They're their stories. People are coming from a real spirit of generosity when they share their stories from their own lives. And so we have to have a lot of respect for that and kind of have that same spirit. So I hope the goal with this is to kind of have that spirit going into this as we receive these stories from people that can be very personal, and I think it can take a lot into our own lives. And that's a lot about what we're at Nehemiah, coming from our lived experience. Dr. G always leads by a sense of vulnerability in what he shares and what he talks about, and that kind of hits other people. So yeah, I'm going to bring him up as we kind of think about that spirit of personal stories, and he's going to tell a story and introduce our next folks. So let's bring him on up.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Can we give it up for the musicians again? They were really talented. I'm really glad that you're here tonight. I appreciate you sharing this evening with us. This is beautiful space. It's my first time being in this wonderful space. And I just want to give it up for the staff that's here at Cafe Coda. This is just beautiful space, and I appreciate its founder and its staff. Let me just contextualize Nehemiah just a little bit before I get into my story. Nehemiah turns 30 years old this fall. I can't believe that it was actually October of 1992, after a few years of planning, that a group of folks from our community, mainly from our church, noticed that black children in particular were not receiving social services by people who looked like them. And that most of the black children were going into mental health correction facilities or hospitals. And so we also noticed that there weren't many social workers or case managers. And so we thought, could we change the outcome of blacks who are being served by the human service system or not being served? Can we change that if we create something that has black social workers, black mentors, black therapists, black case managers? And so that was really how Nehemiah got started. It then morphed into a number of things where it became more of a leadership development organization, because the people who we were serving, we never called them clients, but those who other organizations would call clients, became some of our best volunteers. And so we wound up hiring those people who created programs and really took our programming to the next level. And then we started focusing on not only how we strengthen the black community, but how we build relationships with the non-black community, our allies or would-be allies, so that we can work together more synergistically in building and creating solutions. And in this phase of our work, we're still focusing on leadership development, but we really are focusing on how we create knowledge and how we produce intellectual property, so that we're controlling the curriculum that we make and the training that we make and the films and the courses, so that we can perpetuate what we've experienced, what we've learned, to generations to come. And so I love the arc of the organization, how we started by focusing on how we wanted to serve, and now we're wanting to really serve the leaders and the influencers and the funders and the volunteers and would-be board members. We're wanting to influence them so that they really understand the work better. And it's taken us about 30 years to get to this point, but I'm really, really excited. And I appreciate the fact that for 30 years my staff has listened, have leaned in, have enjoyed the vision, and have made it theirs as well. And so I'm really proud tonight. So oh, thank you, Siobhan. So I thought the best way for me to start this off tonight is to tell a story about the beginning. We often talk about some of the planning meetings, but I want to bring you into the story of Nehemiah's start, of its beginning, and to talk about the impact and the arc of leadership. Every once in a while, you'll have this opportunity to do something that feels absolutely benign, absolutely ordinary, and becomes this real extraordinary thing. So years ago, I was working at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I was the Minority Affairs Director in the School of Pharmacy, and some friends from Christ Presbyterian Church invited me to an urban conference. First, I kind of chuckled because I thought, okay, this is my world. My white friends want to introduce me to an urban reality. But I'll go. This is a conference. I don't get a chance to do conferences like that. And I was blown away. I knew what my ministry and what my work looked like in our church, but I'd never seen folks from the faith community create cafes and coffee shops and nursing homes and after-school programs and truck driving schools and loan programs and house buying programs. And so I remember just standing in the conference, listening to what people were talking about, and I just said, this feels like a second calling. Like this is different than just having your own personal faith. I never thought about it in this very public way. And it was this conference that was called SCOOP, and the acronym is for Seminary Consortium for Urban Pastoral Education. It stirred me so deeply that when I came back, I resigned from my job at the university, which is hard to do because black people are taught do not leave government jobs. And so others have probably taught that as well, but we're really taught it. And so you're gonna leave a government job with a pension to go ask people for money. And I said, that's what I'm gonna do. But I was smart. I took a leave of absence for 1 year from the university, just in case it didn't work. And so I was so moved by what I saw that I pulled a team of people together to begin to create Nehemiah to do some of the things that we're talking about. After Nehemiah, I'd been at Nehemiah for about 20 years, I realized I was getting older. I had learned a lot of lessons, and I wanted to position myself to begin training the next generation. Because I didn't have a lot of formal training or leadership, I wanted to make sure that young leaders coming behind me would never have to wander around, will you mentor me? Will you mentor me? Will you be my friend? Will you help me? Will you show me how to raise funds? I used to drive to Chicago to be mentored by Wayne Gordon, who headed up Lawndale Church in Chicago. And I would travel around trying to meet people who understood what I wanted to do. So a friend told me, again, this is all about the arc of leadership. A friend told me about a graduate program where you could obtain a doctorate in ministry, where they really want to turn the practitioners into the professors, that they want to take people with lots of life experience and give them the credentials to be able to teach in universities and create training programs. And so I flew out to Seattle. I interviewed for this school, and there was a gentleman who had created this school. His name is Ray Bakke, and the school was called Bakke Graduate University. So I'm making my application. I'm sitting there, and I'm talking to him, and he says, so, Alex, tell me your story. And I said, well, Mr. Bakke, I went to this conference in Chicago years ago. I talked about all my experience. And I said, I went to this conference in Chicago. It's called SCOOP. It's the Seminary Consortium of Urban Pastoral. Like, I'm laying it out, explaining it to him. He says, that was my doctoral work. And so I kept talking about what I learned at this conference, and I stopped and I said, you went to SCOOP for your doctoral program? He said, no, I created SCOOP in my doctoral program. So I'm sitting here explaining to this man what SCOOP is. That's like somebody sitting down 30 years saying, yeah, Nehemiah, it kind of means this, it's doing that. And so I said, this man sat here and let me explain to him what his baby is and didn't interrupt me. I guess he wanted to see if his work was working. And so I'm with passion. I'm like, Seminary Consortium for Urban Pastoral Education. And I saw people doing these after-school programs. And it was at that program that I toured stuff in Chicago and said, we can do this. I know Madison is not Chicago, but I knew how to do, I use a musical term, Mitch, I transposed what I saw in my head to make it work for Madison, and that was the impetus to this. And so, needless to say, Mr. Bakke admitted me into the program. And one day, he asked me to, because I'd have to fly out to Seattle to take these 10-day courses, and we had one course in India and one course in South Africa. And so one day he asked me to give the lecture on the complexity of the urban pastoral context. And I said, Dr. Bakke, why would you, I'm not on your staff, why would you want me to do this? He said, because you have more pastoral experience than any of my faculty. And so he was living out this reality that the student could become the professor because there were things that they could learn. I never really considered myself that scholarly. I knew that I was a smart person, but it never really played out in my grades, my GPA, or my aptitude test. But I graduated from that doctoral program with honors, and I was given the Raymond J. Bakke Award for Academic Excellence. And 2 weeks ago, I was in Seattle at his memorial service. And to be with his family, his son, Brian, called me and said, it would be important to my dad for you to be here. And when we found out that his dad was dying, that Ray Bakke was dying from cancer, he called me so that we could have a Zoom conference. And we had this really powerful conversation where he was still mentoring me and still giving me all of this information. But I walked away from that space thinking about the arc of leadership, that I walked away from his memorial service thinking, wow, I'm the age he was when I sat down in front of him as this young leader saying, I want to learn, I want to do something in my community, and I want to teach what I've learned. I want to be this teaching presence, and I want to make sure that I help the next generation of practitioners become the professors. And so my story is the arc of leadership is so wonderful that it started at this conference that he created, and then I'm explaining the impact of his conference to him, and then he trains me in that, and then I receive an award to continue that, and then I got to say goodbye to him a few weeks ago as I come back thinking, how do I take what I've really learned, and now I have the credentials and now life experience to make sure that I give back to the next generation? And so this is just a story of my arc of leadership and how I've been impacted by someone's life, and I hope that the work of Nehemiah does this and becomes this for other people as well. Thank you. With that, I want to get the ball rolling because we have some fantastic folks who are talented and are going to be telling stories. And so our first person up is a staff member who's been with me and been with us for well over a decade. She's known affectionately as Coach O, Ozanne Anderson. And she directs our education and youth leadership programming, and she's going to come and tell you how she sees Nehemiah through her eyes and her story. Let's welcome her.
So hello, everybody. My story is a collective of stories, actually. And but I would say the theme of all the stories is leadership and love, and how one can't go without the other and be done effectively. So first I'll start with letting you know that I have 3 wonderful sons, my 3 sons. My oldest son, he's 22. My middle son is about to be 21, and my youngest son is 17. So we'll talk about my middle son. His name is Noah. So one day, actually his 8th grade year, Noah had a really hard time. There was a lot of things going on in the district where curriculum was changing. There wasn't a lot of communication going out to parents or to teachers about the change in curriculum. But my son Noah, from very young, he's always been a very smart character, but the way we teach, the way we learn in Western society is not necessarily his forte. So he always struggled with reading. We worked very hard with him with reading and reading concepts and things like that. And he also had speech therapy when he was young. So fast forward, 8th grade, they changed the curriculum. He was very good at math. This was something he was very confident in, math. But when they changed it to a literacy-based curriculum, even in math, this changed his whole world, and he began to suffer greatly in 8th grade. So we get grades back home, and I'm looking at these grades, and it's just looking like my son has done nothing for a whole half of year. And so I'm ready to pounce on my son. I'm ready to, just cut everything out, just give him the letter of law and, no more video games, no more anything, just about to hammer it in. So one day I come home, and I had been cleaning that whole week. And as I cleaned, my family was undoing my cleaning. And so day after day, I would clean, and my family would undo. Like, I would wash dishes, and dishes would appear in the sink. I would wash clothes, and clothes would be on the floor. And so one day I came home, and I'm extremely frustrated. I'm just sitting there, I'm frustrated, I'm looking at everything, and it just looks like I can't move forward. And all of a sudden, I began to shut down. Like, I began to feel like I just can't do it. Of course, it wasn't just the cleaning thing, but that was the thing I was focused on at the point. To the point where I went in the bedroom, I laid down on the bed, and I would not move. And I began to think to myself, I can't stay here. I cannot stay here. I knew I was feeling frustrated, but I knew that I couldn't stay in the bed. But every emotion that I felt defeated. Then all of a sudden, I'm a very spiritual person. The Spirit of the Lord spoke to me. This is how Noah feels right now. I saw my son in a very different way because I was allowed to feel my son. At that point, I saw him. I didn't see grades. I didn't see curriculum. I didn't see the fact that he wasn't doing his homework. I saw and I felt the frustration of how he was feeling at the time. I saw him trying and trying and trying, and everything that he would learn would be undone. At that point, it changed my whole perspective. At that point, it was no longer about the hammer. It was about how can I support my son? How can I speak to the various powers that be and help them work for my son? How can I help my son see himself and not be defeated? That's story number one. Story number two, this goes back to when I was 17. When I was 17, I had a lot of trials. I did not get along very well with my mother. She did not see me. And I had a very, very hard time. I remember very clearly I was 17, to the point where I was thinking about ending it all. These thoughts just kept going and going and going through my head, and I felt like no one saw me. Like I was so stuck in my head of, I've just messed up so bad. I'm not worthy, and I literally was having thoughts of how can I end it all. Then one day, at the time I was staying with my Aunt Merle, my cousin, her daughter, came, and I was laying on the couch, and I remember I was just stuck. I was trapped in my own feeling and my own feeling of unworthiness. And my cousin came and she touched me and she said, "Come with me." She took me out to eat. She had a conversation with me and she just told me, "I love you and I see you." That's story number two. And I do believe that she saved my life that day. Story number three, I ran the Nehemiah ACE program had been in hiatus for about 3 years due to the pandemic. We brought ACE up again this year, and we had a new partnership and everything. So a lot of the children that we took into our program, we had 130 children in our program. And so a lot of the children that we took into our program did not know me, I did not know them, but we had a lot of social emotional issues going on right away when we went in. So there was this young man, and we shall call him Jay. Jay liked to run out of the classroom. Jay liked to throw tantrums. He liked to hit people. He did a lot of wonderful, colorful things. So pretty much, a lot of our coaches and everything was getting frustrated with Jay. And we had a saying around, we actually stole this thing from Sean Covey, between stimulus and response, you have a choice, right? So this became a saying around the camp this year. And so Jay was used to, he was in a situation where he doesn't necessarily have a lot of teachers and educators of color around him. So a lot of things that Jay could get away with at his regular school, he could not get away with Coach O. And so anyway, this frustrated Jay a little bit. But however, at some point, Jay began to understand that some of the behaviors was not acceptable. So when some of the coaches just couldn't deal with him anymore, he came with Coach O, kicking, screaming, but he came to Coach O. So anyway, one day, after just building relationship with Jay, I was watching him. He was in the gym. He was running and playing, and somebody stole a ball from Jay. Now, mind you, Jay is 5 years old. He stole the ball, and Jay was on his way for attack. He was just on his way for the jugular, right? And I look at him, and he sees me. He catches eyes, and he freezes right away. And I say to Jay, between stimulus and response. And then he goes, "I have a choice." And I said, "Jay, well, what are you going to choose?" he drops the ball. The other kid who had antagonized him goes over him and gives him a big hug. And, they squashed their own conflict at that time. Last story, I promise. This same camp that I worked, and I've been doing this through Nehemiah for about 12 years now. But this same camp that I worked, and I take my job very seriously. I believe that leadership begins in children. The Bible says little children shall lead them. He has ordained leadership in our young people very early. That's why we train them up in the way that they should go, so that when they grow up, they will not depart from what we've taught them. So this particular year, and again, I've been doing this for about 12 years now, but 30 years collectively working with children and youth. My boss came and saw what I do. He came, he spent time, he watched, he saw the children, he saw what I do. That meant everything to me, because it's not just about crayons and coloring books and field trips and discipline. We're building leaders of tomorrow. I felt seen. I felt love. And an element of love is, can we see them first? That's my story.
All right. We want to keep things moving right along. Our next storyteller is Mr. Aaron Hicks. Aaron's been working with us for, probably 12 years, and a great source of encouragement, and he just embodies a good story and storytelling. So come on up, Aaron, and give us one, please.
Thank you, guys. First, I want to let you know that the story I'm about to share with you guys, I'm doing it under distress. So Pastor G he bullied me a little bit. And this is the other one right there. So just know this story. But this is, I just wanted to share with you guys my journey to Nehemiah. It's one of the most interesting journeys, and it's a journey that I never expected to work for Nehemiah, to come here, and how Nehemiah has impacted me and vice versa. But let me just share this with you. I recall, this is 2008, I'm sitting in prison, and I'm trying to figure out, where am I going to go? Like, I know it's about time for me to get ready to get out of prison, but I don't have a church home. I don't have employment set up. It's a lot of things that I didn't have that I wanted to be prepared for when I got out. And I'll never forget this moment, and I actually shared it with Pastor G, but this moment was a very powerful moment. I got a friend of mine that we've walked the track before. His name is also Aaron, like mine, and he brought me a piece of paper, almost like on a card, And he was like, you're getting out in Madison, aren't you? And I was like, yeah, I'm going to get out in Madison. And he was like, hey, you should check out this church. And he wrote down on the piece of paper, it just said, Pastor G. That was in '09. And I didn't think much of it because I wasn't getting out no time soon. So I didn't know how that was all going to turn out. I didn't, you get information, you take it, you put it away. And that's kind of what I did. I put that information away. And I continued my journey, again, not knowing where I'm going to go and how life is, what life is going to bring for me. And I'll never forget this moment. There was an attorney. His name is Byron Lynchstein. And Byron, I met him in 2006. And he told me, he said, hey, you really impressed me. He said, the day you get home from prison, I'll be there to see you. And you hear certain things, and you don't really know if all of these things is true. Nevertheless, I wound up getting out of prison in 2010. And sure enough, here's this Byron Lynchstein. 4 years later, this guy still, he was like, you really impressed me. And so we became friends, and he was no longer my attorney, and I was no longer, had any legal issues, so that was all good. And he was like, I have a friend of mine that I want to introduce you to. And just so you guys know, it wasn't Pastor G. But he actually introduced me to Jerome Dillard. And I was in a halfway house. And while I was in the halfway house, Jerome came and visited me. And, oh, my name is Jerome Dillard. So, that name is serious. I got the mic now, so. But anyway, so we hit it off immediately. It was just a kindred spirit. It was just powerful. And so as time went on, Jerome just started to show me some of the work that he was doing. And he had an organization called VBB, Voices Beyond Bars. And so every Tuesday we would meet over at the Urban League, and it was an amazing experience. And at that time, still, I never met Pastor G, but I wasn't looking either. So it wasn't like it was something that I was looking for. But one night, Pastor G happened to come to VBB. And when he came, immediately I remembered the name right away. It was off that card, and I was like, wow, this is crazy. Like, this is Pastor G. And so from that point on, that journey, I got a lot of tutelage from a lot of amazing people that's in this room right now. And they started to groom me for leadership. And I really didn't know what leadership looked like. I didn't know how that would look, and specifically more than anything for me and coming home from prison. Usually when you think of leadership, you think of people coming from a college or something premier, but you don't think about leadership coming from prison. And so when I finally met Pastor G, him and I and Jerome, we were actually in the parking lot of Urban League, and he asked a question. He asked, was I a pastor? That kind of threw me off. Like, no, I just got a big mouth. Definitely not a pastor, though. But sure enough, that's what our relationship began. And after that, one of the things that really impacted me, it was one of the most impactful moments, is when Pastor G started to create his own niche, and that was Man Up. And it was, again, some of the same individuals that's in this room now had participated in Man Up. And you presented something, the skull and the teddy bear. And in all transparency, I didn't learn about that the night of the group that you presented, but it was so powerful in so many different people's lives that I started to learn about it as well. They started to teach me everything that you were talking about. And I think the most uniqueness that really struck me was your ability to be vulnerable. Most people, when they get prestige, usually, it's almost like they're floating. And that wasn't the case. He was right there with us, with the men. You know, all of us had our own trials and tribulations, but he was there, and he was really pouring into us, and we were pouring into him. And from that point on, that was a game changer for my whole life. I saw leadership in a lens that I never saw it before. I didn't know that you had the ability to be transparent, to still be you, to be able to talk to people about hurt habits and hang-ups and things that have affected you. And so when he did that, for me, it was a game changer. He does it even when he preaches, still shares about his own trials and tribulations. And that's huge for me. And so that journey really changed the trajectory of my life. And ultimately enough, it gave me the opportunity to now that I'm able to run that group that he initially started. So that's huge. You can give it up for that. And so as time went on, as we continued to go through this journey, it allowed me to utilize the very things that were given to me, walking with other individuals through their journey. You know, the word through just means temporary. You don't stay there. But we go through things to be able to help other individuals move through that because we understand it. And so it was the people who understood me the most that helped me walk through this journey. And I wish I could say I have arrived, but I haven't arrived. However, I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt that my whole journey to Nehemiah has been influential in ways that I can't even explain. I never imagined just standing before you people and sharing what has happened in my life. And now I'm doing amazing things with the UW. Shout out to you guys right here for, they work with me. And it's just this is community, this is family. And they have taught me how to take my mess and turn it into my message. And so today, that's what I do, and I share with other people. And they gave me my voice back. I didn't have a voice. And to be able to speak into other people's life is huge. So I just want to say thank you guys for listening to my story. And I want to say thank you, Pastor G, for pouring into my life. Because without you, I don't know where I would be. So that's huge. And I just want to shout out to all of y'all for coming.
Man, let's give it up again for Aaron. It's powerful. Harry Hawkins is my executive vice president at Nehemiah, and among other things, he is also an author. And so storytelling is built into him, and an awesome speaker and teacher and preacher as well. So let's give it up for Harry Hawkins as he comes and shares with us his story.
Man, y'all don't know what you're doing giving me a mic and an audience. This is like show and tell for adults, okay? So I'm going to squeeze in about 5 or 6 stories before I'm done, but they're all going to come together, I promise. And to start me off, I'm going to start with when I was about 2 or 3, I was going to a school, and it was show and tell, and I forgot my thing to show and tell. So what I decided to do, because you couldn't just not have your turn, right? I decided to tell this story about how my house burned down and firefighters had to rescue me from my burning bed. So tonight, I'm not going to tell you any lies. I'm going to tell you the truth, okay? But that's to let you know how serious stories are to me, right? I will even lie at school, although my mother did not appreciate that when she had to come and tell them that we actually had no emergency. So one of the hard things about this night was trying to figure out how in the world do I communicate all that Nehemiah is in 5 to 10 minutes, right? I might need a little bit more time than that. But if you know me, you know there's 2 things I love, stories and food, and I'm going to put both of those together tonight for you. So the story that we're going to talk about tonight is going to be iced coffee and donuts. Okay, so I want you to remember that. Iced coffee and donuts. The first part, the iced coffee part. So every morning I go to the coffee shop. Now, coming to Madison, I spend a lot of time in coffee shops. I don't like coffee, right? So what I did was I had to come up with something, and I decided I would drink tea. So every morning it's become a habit, particularly during the pandemic. I go to my favorite coffee shop, and I get my iced tea, Now, I'm from the South, so don't tell anybody that knows me from my past that I drink just plain iced tea, because they might not let me back into Georgia. But anyhow, so this one morning, I get my iced tea, and as I get back onto Park Street, I take a sip, and I say, oh, God. I look at it, I think, it's like, what was that? And I take another sip, and I'm like, I think they burned this tea. I was like, this is not right. And so, for those of you who drink coffee, probably already know what happened. They gave me an iced coffee, right? So I turn around, and I go back, and I get my tea, and they were so apologetic. But what happened was, my brain, because I don't drink coffee, I've had it twice in my life, my brain didn't know, so I know some people's jaws just dropped. It's okay, it's all right. You know, it's like not oxygen, it's all right. You know, it's okay, we don't need it to live. Some people are disagreeing right now, but that's okay. But what was interesting was that as I was thinking about this, my brain didn't have any reference to really understand what my tongue was telling it was happening, right? So the best thing I could come up with was, I think they burned my tea. Now, as a black man in Madison, I've been that iced coffee. When I got here, right, I've been here 10 years. When I got here, Madison didn't know how to take me. They took a sip and go, that's strong. That's angry, a little bitter, right? Now, there was nothing wrong with that iced coffee. My wife drank it, and she enjoyed the mess out of that iced coffee, okay? So there was nothing wrong with the iced coffee. The problem was I hadn't had enough experience with coffee to even understand what I was enjoying, right? And so for a lot of black people in Madison, that is their experience. That everywhere they go, they're told they're a little too bitter, a little too strong, a little too angry. This flavor is not quite right. But here's the thing, and this is where Nehemiah comes in, because I was able to be a part of this orbit. I was adopted into this family coming up on 6 years ago. And there's another story. This is the donut part of the story, right? So a couple of years ago, this is before the pandemic, there were some scholars from all over the continent of Africa that had a chance to go to universities in the United States, and some of them were here in Madison, and they got a chance to visit with Dr. G, and they wanted to hear all about what he was doing and get connected, and as a part of that, Dr. G brought some of the staff in. And so we got a chance to meet them, and their last day in Madison, they invited Dr. G, his sister, and some of his staff to come and just have coffee and donuts with him that morning. And when I got there, I'm an introvert, so typically I'm a people sprinter, right? So I'm not shy, but I burn out quick, right? And I don't necessarily make friends fast, right? It's kind of a slow takeoff process. But anyhow, when I got there, we start talking, and about 30 minutes into this meeting on a Saturday morning with complete strangers, I realized I felt like I was at home. And this was the most amazing thing, because I never had that experience where I run into a group of strangers and all of a sudden I'm just, chopping it up like it's Thanksgiving dinner. And when I walked out of there at the end of this, I had forgotten that I was in Madison. I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh, that's right. It's a lot of white people here. This is Madison, right? No offense, but it was jarring to come back in. I'm like, wow. But here's what I realized. The reason why I fit in and was able to navigate that space so well was because what the African scholars were telling us was that they were sharing their community with us, was what I recognized as family here in the U.S. It was the thing that shaped me the most when I was growing up. It was the thing that made me who I am today. It's the thing that, of all the things that people enjoy about me, you can trace those roots back to that. And I thought that was so amazing that after 400 years and oppression and all sorts of atrocities, the thing that shaped me the most was what in Africa is called community, but here has become family. And Nehemiah is that. Nehemiah takes that culture and makes it institutional. Nehemiah takes that reality and shares it with the rest of Madison. And it is so very difficult to explain to somebody how in the world you can take strangers and make them part of your family. But that's exactly what Nehemiah does. So for my family that's been here, first of all, y'all told some good stories, so y'all come and fundraising with me now. You done told on yourselves. Thank you for that. Appreciate you. But really, it's amazing to be a part of that and to witness that, because something that has transformed so much of who I am, I felt like I was coming home when I came to Madison and found the Nehemiah orbit. So I appreciate that, and thank you all.
Woo! Just a little quick thing before I tell my story. Eli didn't mention this because it's not really Nehemiah related, but he told the story about how I met him and Jake and Jeremy in my office a number of years ago. We're having these ideas about how we work together. Well, they ended up becoming my producer and my engineer for Black Like Me, and together we just won Madison Magazine's Best Podcast of Madison. And those guys that are up here are all the sound stuff making that happen. They rock. They really do. They really do. And now they do have black friends. Jeremy has one. Eli has a lot. Oh, okay. All right. I want to try to weave my earlier story together with some of those that I heard. I grew up in Madison, and there's this whole thought or belief system that education and degrees really make the person. And so I remember if you told someone you had a bachelor's degree here in Madison, their response would be like, "Oh, that's cute. When are you going to grad school?" So I don't know how it is in other places of the world, but you are actually shamed if you only have like a bachelor's degree in Madison. So when you do receive those extra degrees, those advanced degrees, it does give you this sense. It can mess with your head about, well, what does it mean? Do people follow you? Do you follow other people? How does it really work? And so I say that to set up this next story. Aaron talked about how I started Man Up, and it was actually a program I did while I was in the program that I told you about, my doctoral program, and I wanted to write my dissertation, and I wrote my dissertation about the impact of fatherlessness in black men. So I thought, maybe I should create a group. When you're an executive of a nonprofit, you don't get to run groups. You're basically overseeing, you're managing, and really your job is fundraising. And so I thought this is going to be my place to design a program. I called up my friend Jerome Dillard. I wanted him to really validate what I was doing because I said, let's really focus on men who have been incarcerated. Those Tuesday nights became my space because when I sat with my pastoral friends, and this is not a bash against other pastors, we were talking about color swatches for new sanctuaries. We were talking about what books we were reading, what conferences we were going to. This is before podcasts, so nobody was really listening to those. But we would talk about all these other theological ideals. And when I sat with those guys in Man Up, they didn't really care about my accolades. They showed me all of this love, all this respect, but they created a space where I could talk and I could process life as well. I saw such leadership skills and capabilities that I hired a life coach to create a reentry coaching position. And I hired this coach to take these men through, I don't know how many months, several months, and they each received a certificate as reentry coaches. That name didn't exist, that role didn't exist, and we had to really fight for it. Aaron had an agent who yanked him from Man Up because she asked me, who did I think I was calling Aaron a leader? Where did I get the right? And I said, well, I just wrote a dissertation and earned a doctorate in transformational leadership. I think I'm probably a little bit more qualified than you to identify leaders and what they look like, particularly when it comes to black men. So I had to go over her head a couple of levels to get Aaron back into the group. But one night I came to the group on a Tuesday, and Aaron, you remember this. I came to the group and I said, you guys, I had a dream that I got arrested. I said, I got a dream that I went to prison. And in this dream I kept saying, I got to call Aaron. I got to call Jerome. I got to figure out what to do in prison, what not to do in prison, what to say, what not to say. Oh my God, I'm going to prison. Mom, I'm going to prison. And so they listened to me tell this story as a dream, and then they started laughing. They said, We think God gave you that dream so you could relate to us. We think you got that dream so that you could understand us. So we had a little fun about this. Every once in a while, they're like, "Hey, remember that time you was incarcerated that one night for like 5 minutes?" But the fact, I was just telling a dream. But the fact that they were trying to find ways to explain, it was really helping me to relate to them. But this is what those men and those brothers did for me. And Aaron thanked me for my impact in his life, but I need to thank Aaron and Coop and Jerome and Willie and Terry and the other folks who showed up at those groups. I realized that my core issue in life was a fatherhood wound. And it was in sitting with these men that I realized my father wasn't just out, leaving my mother when I was a kid. He was in prison. I never admitted that. I never talked about it because I really didn't remember it. I just remembered that he was gone. And so as I sat with these men and they were telling their stories and their regrets and their triumphs, what I realized was that I was sitting in that group because I had earned some letters behind my name, and it was my job in preparing for, to finish my degree, to convene this group and to hear about the pain of black men as they're wrestling with issues of fatherlessness. But what they did was not only create space for me to voice that, they said things to me that my father could not have articulated. They, as men who had been formerly incarcerated, said things, and it made me ask, I wonder if my father felt that way. They talked about missing their children because they're in prison, and I thought, I never thought my father missed me. I just kept thinking that he was gone, lamenting the relationships and articulating the pain. And even though I get lots of recommendation, because if you're a brother with an advanced degree in Madison, that's something in people's eyes. But in that space, in order for me to fully fill the shoes of a leader, to fully carry that mantle that Dr. Baki was training us to have, in order for this practitioner to become the professor, I had to deal with that great wound that pushed me to a lot of perfectionism, to a desire, to an addiction, to a lot of attaboys. It was hard to know what I really wanted because I was trying to really get the affirmation that I didn't get. And as these men articulated the voice of caring, compassionate, formerly incarcerated men, I realized that they were articulating in my hearing things that I never thought about with my father. And because of that process, I did something that I swore I would never do. I eulogized my father when he died. I stopped calling him my father. I referred to him even from the pulpit. Founder of Life people know this as a sperm donor, even though he and my mom were married for 5 years before I was born. I was no accident. I was planned. But the work of these men, this work of transformational leadership, this work of creating space was so important to me. So when people come to Nehemiah with their degrees and their papers and their sheepskin, lambskin, whatever it's called, and they want to help and serve people, we tell them, you need to understand that this is going to help you more than you're going to help folks. And if you have not postured yourself to let these children, to let these men, to let these young moms, to let these kids school you, educate you, and help you, then you're not really a good fit for our organization, and you're not fit and worthy of volunteerism. Because you must come in the door understanding that if you don't become the student, you can never become the leader. So thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, for that work, which was really powerful. I give them a hard time, but I love these men. I knew people who had degrees in counseling. I knew people who had theological degrees. I knew people who were executives. But I was able to, sit around with a thug like Aaron and have this. I'm kidding. I'm just kidding, Aaron. Aaron, I'm kidding. I'm kidding, Aaron. I was able to sit around with these guys and not have to impress them and to really experience healing. And that's the beauty of Nehemiah's work. We love it not only because we get to help people, but we are helped and healed every day. And that's the beauty of Nehemiah. And that's the beauty of transformational leadership. And that's the beauty of getting people to be involved in healing themselves and healing other people. Another little short story that I just want to slide into this is that there's a gentleman, I want to call him Howard. I've told this story before. Some of the folks know Howard. But I was talking to Howard one day about his struggle with crack cocaine. And I was, trying to be very stern because I needed him to change. Like, Howard, you got a problem. You got to deal with this crack problem. And he said, Pastor G, cocaine ain't my problem. And I just thought, oh, geez, here we go again. He's in denial. He said, cocaine's my solution. You haven't asked me what my problem was. Yeah, that'll come up on you as you drive home tonight. I sat there and thought, the programming of Nehemiah needs to understand people's stories, to downplay their brokenness, to upplay their humanity, and to get to listen to and understand their solutions until they find better ones. And when he found community, and when he found support, he was able to move away from that addiction and actually was one of the gentlemen who went through that reentry coaching program. But of the many profound lessons that I've learned in my professional life, when that man looked me in my eye and said, cocaine is not my problem, it's my solution. You haven't even asked me about my problem. I realized, well, they didn't teach us that in our leadership program. Whew. Transformation works both ways, and we need to let that happen. Our last speaker is Brittany Lee, and she's going to come up and just help to wrap a nice bow around this, I hope, and to contextualize these things. And so she worked for Nehemiah years ago, so she's always family. It's so great to have her back. Let's welcome her up to the stage.
Good evening. It was a small black tree that was hanging from my shift gear in my car. Because I learned at the age of 16 that you don't hang black trees from the rearview mirror because that's how you get pulled over by police. That's how you get a random search. Because like many of you know, of some recent incidents, I used to live in Minnesota. And what happened to Dante Wright was very much part of my story when I was younger and realizing all the different things we had to do to prevent getting pulled over by the police. I start with that because as I sat in my car, I was sitting near a cliff at this point in time in my life, and it was hard to see throughout the front window. Not because it was raining, it wasn't storming, it wasn't foggy. I was weeping. I was practically suffocating myself on my tears because I was petrified. And the reason that I was petrified, you'll get to know later. As I'm sitting there, all I kept hearing was, you're the worst. They really don't want you. They pity you. You got this because you're a woman. They have to be fair. They're never going to want you. I called my mom because that's what I normally do when I panic, is I call my mom. And as I was hyperventilating on the phone, my mom had only heard my panic 2 times previously in my life. One was when I walked in, worked an entire shift, and got fired from my job, and then called my boyfriend to tell him about it, to where he dumped me. The second time was when a man showed up outside my house and caught me in an alley, and it was the man I feared most in my life, thinking my life was going to end right there. So needless to say, my mom was petrified. My mom was trying to figure out why at very early in the morning, frankly 10 o'clock, I was panicking. And all I could barely breathe out was, there's an interview. And some of you may be like, an interview? Like, that's the reason you were having a full-up panic attack? Yes. Because 4 years prior to this, I was being arrested. And I say that because that was what changed my life. So here I am, sitting in this parking lot over a cliff, debating on what I'm going to do next. And I'm like, Mom, I don't think I can do this. And my mom goes, Britt, you need to put on your big girl panties, you need to get your ass in there, and you need to rock this interview because it's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. And it was like she snapped her fingers. My mom had done this before, and some of you may be like, oh, she's tough love. No, this is my mom's way of saying, like, you got this, you're going to be great. Like, put on big girl panties. Still to this day, don't know what they look like, so just keep that in your minds. So there I was. I played a worship song. For those of you who are detail-oriented, I have no idea what it was. Imagine it was Jesus, I Love You, or Great I Am, some worship song. I got out of my car, walked to the back of it, and walked up small steps to walk into a yellow house. or at least it looked like one. I was pretty confused because I thought I was supposed to be at an office. Even though this was my second time there, I thought maybe I was still in the wrong place. So I walked up about 6 steps to meet a lady at the front desk who kind of looked like she was like, why are you here? That woman also became to be my mentor over the past 4 years. I walked down the hallway, and there I met 2 men who were standing there, and I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? Because at this point, I'd already wiped off my mascara. I probably didn't look like I was crying, but I really felt like I was dying on the inside and slightly hyperventilating. This bigger guy was like, cool, welcome, we're so excited to see you. And I'm like, oh my God, this guy's got a lot of energy. This is overwhelming. And he offered me this computer chair while he sat in this little small chair that was way too small to be in this office for any of the people here. And there was another person sitting behind a desk with windows open. And I was like, why are these windows open? Like, this is just, like, it was weird to me. Like, don't you guys have AC? Now, you're probably wondering, like, how the rest of this interview went. Honestly, I don't remember. I remember one moment. And the moment was, so how has incarceration impacted you? In almost every part of my life, I dodged this question severely. And I started with, oh, yeah, I was born into it. My dad was incarcerated, so, like, that's how it impacted me. Froze, and they both looked at me like, okay, that's cool, but, like, we really need someone who's been, in the system. And I said, oh, yeah, by the way. And I proceeded to tell my story that 9 months ago I'd gotten off supervision after serving 3 years on supervision and 90 days in jail, and told them my entire story of how it even started. And I think the weirdest part was, like, here was now, for those of you who haven't figured out who it is, it's Terry Hawkins and Coop. And they both started, like, almost crying. And I was like, this is weird. Like, why are they feeling some type of emotion? Because to me, I was like, this is the point where you tell me, like, I shouldn't be here. And for me, I realized later that it was probably the main reason I got hired. So the thing that had been the worst part of my experience was the reason that got me in this door. Thanks. So I walked out of the interview and I was like, these people, I got that. Like, for the first time in my life, I was like, I think I got it. And it was crazy because I'd been through 4 of the hardest years of my life, because to me, supervision was creating my own home, was my prison. I learned to avoid people, avoid family holidays. I didn't leave my house 90% of the time, and I did whatever I could because all I kept thinking in my mind was, I can never get arrested again. Because ironically, if you rewind, fast forward, all the different things, when I got arrested, I was in a 17-room sorority house, and I was watching Orange is the New Black. So I knew God had, like, a weird sense of humor, so I was like, maybe this is just another one of those moments where I think this is great, and this isn't going to go very well. Well, a week later, I get a call from Coop, and he's like, yeah, we're going to hire you. And I was like, that's awesome, super excited. And I, like, didn't know what to do with it, because, again, I was waiting for him to call it. I can be like, oh, we called the wrong person, because he never said my name. So there was that. So a week later, on a Wednesday, I come in, and it was my first day, and I was like, this is going to be awesome. About 2 hours in, Coop came up to me, and he goes, your energy is kind of low. Like, are you good? Like, you're not the same person. And I was like, I knew it. I hired the wrong person. That wasn't it. I looked at Coop and said, actually, my best friend died on Sunday, and I'm just here. So I'm trying to, like, just make it through. And he's like, you don't have to be here. And I said, actually, I do, because I know that God put me here. And he just looked at me kind of puzzled, like, oh, my God, here goes this crazy Christian girl. It wasn't. Coop and I had been, when we had originally met, some time before, had learned, we kept running into each other, and we couldn't figure out where we knew each other. And somehow in this moment, I remembered I volunteered at Nehemiah, actually, with Karen Reese for a really long time. So for, like, probably a year, like, this hidden person who came in and came out. And my friend that had passed away was the reason that I came to Nehemiah. He actually wasn't able to go, but, like, I pursued and kept showing up. And I think for me, when I was thinking about all these things that were happening, I was like, I have to be here. Like, God placed me here for whatever reason. I don't know why. I didn't feel qualified. I also was the only, other than Miss Charla, and if anyone's met Miss Charla is, how do I say this? She is the kindest person, but will tell you the truth no matter what. And she is very, like, type A. So, like, if you have a dot wrong, Miss Charlotte will tell you. She will send back a whole document if you didn't do something right. And if you want to ask about Coop's calendar, she's like, let me see, and she'll get back to you when she feels like she's going to get back to you with her calendar. Love Miss Charlotte. Charlotte kept us very straight and narrow. But in the reentry, as a housing coordinator, I was the only woman. So this, and like, it was over reentry housing for men. So I didn't really know how, like, being a woman was going to impact this place, or like if it was going to be this weird, awkward thing all the time. But I learned that I was probably okay because Coop always did the thing that most of you have seen as normal if you've been around him. He's like, cool, all right, everything's going to be fine. Yeah, like, come on. Like, very high energy all the time, which I learned to find very endearing. But it was at Nehemiah that I not only met that, like, Coop was going to be a part. I did a lot of work with Aaron and a lot of people that are in this room. Coach O. With Lindsay and Harry. Harry taught me that being an introvert and lunch matters no matter what. And you have every right to tell people not to talk to you when you're eating your food. Appreciated very much. But through that, I had learned at Nehemiah that, like, it was okay to be myself. I learned through a lot of people around me that it was okay not to defend my blackness, but to love my blackness. Because in the family that I grew up in, I was raised by a bunch of white people. Sorry to those of you in the room. But that wasn't convenient when I grew up. Being biracial, being black was inconvenient. And it was often the controversy that happened to my family. So I had never learned. I didn't have my black dad, because like I said, he was incarcerated. So I never learned what it was like to, like, own your blackness and to have curves. Apparently curves are now the thing. And I was like, man, if I had just been born a decade later, I would have survived all of life. But yeah, going through and working at Nehemiah, there are so many things that I had learned in my story. And, like, obviously, for, like, as Dr. G said, I'm not there anymore. And that was one of the hardest decisions of my life, was to actually leave Nehemiah, because for me, it was the first place that, like, built my foundation and gave me the voice to be here. For years, many people had tried to get me to share my story and talk about how great and, like, how much I was able to do all these great things. But I think at the time, like, I went from isolation to watching God put different people in my life through Nehemiah to, like, build this fortress around me. And it was weird that he used a place called Nehemiah to literally live out the Nehemiah story and put people around me to be able to come up today and now work for Jerome Dillard, who's my other boss. I shouldn't say other, because he is my main boss, but I feel like I have, like, 4 bosses, because even they're, like, all in the room right now. You're all great. I love you all. It's been great working for all of you. But part of my story and part of being at Nehemiah has created this voice that I never thought I had, because for me, I didn't think women talked about the fact that they'd been incarcerated. I didn't think that women talked about any of the things, because frankly, most people don't think that. When I went to take my mugshot, they thought I was kind of actually a corrections officer or a probation officer or a lawyer. Like, I got confused many times for different people. And it was at Nehemiah and through this that God has built up. And I've learned one thing from Harry also is that anytime I'm in trouble, I just need to make one phone call and he will sound the alarms, because I watched him do it for his kid. I watched Dr. G and everybody else make phone calls. And I was like, that's all you guys have to do? Like, you don't need to, like, build an army? And he's like, we are the army. And I was like, okay, that's really interesting. But yeah, going through and, like, learning and coming back, and, like, it's part of the reason I come back. Many people have met me in this room. I'm often the one that's in the background trying to avoid people. And part of that is because I often found before I started at Nehemiah and now after, is like, if you get to know me, then you're a threat. And I learned that because that's what happens when you're on supervision. And that's what happens when you're in the system, is as soon as somebody knows something about you, they can do something. And then I learned the quickest way to solve that problem is to build a wall. And I learned that I don't have to answer. I can just make a phone call. I can call on Aaron. I can call on anybody at Nehemiah instantly, so that I don't have to fight the battles anymore. And I think it was the first time coming to Nehemiah that I learned that it's not just me, it's a we. And there's something about having a fortress and a community of people who teach you how to love yourself when the rest of the world tells you that you're not enough, that I think is really, really important. And I think in some ways, it's the most unique thing, because for me, Nehemiah became home. And I don't think I ever felt at home until I came to Nehemiah after coming back from college. After being, when you're displaced and your home is the worst place you want to be, but it's the only place you feel safe, home takes a different name. Until I came to Nehemiah, and it literally felt like I was leaving home as an adult to go out into the world and do the thing that I was called to do. And happy to say that a lot of the courage they gave me, I took my LSATs this weekend. Hopefully I'll be a lawyer soon, so that's exciting. Thank you. But yeah, it's been the voice of little did I know that God was placing people. I met Coop before. I met Jerome actually 2.5 years. And when I sat down and took my interview with Jerome, he looked at me and he said, "Welcome home." And it was there that I knew that once again, God had placed me in a new place to do the work that I do. So, thank you.
One more time for Brittany Lee. Mr. Taylor, we had a chance to thank your staff, but can you just help me give it up for the owner of this wonderful space, Mr. Hanad John Taylor? Sir, thank you for creating this kind of space in the community, for this kind of voice. Come on up and just say hello.
For those of you who have never been here before, I want to say welcome to Cafe Coda, one of the coolest places in the world, especially tonight. It's really quite an experience coming from Chicago in 1993 and, having the challenges that I have had to try to do some of the things that we're doing now. And it's really, great to see after that time some things come to fruition. First you think it, and then you visualize it. And then that thing that you visualize, if you can just keep focusing on it and keep that affirmation that it is possible and it is real and it is good, all of a sudden it happens. And that has been my experience here, and I'm just so honored to have known this gentleman in the course of my personal and cultural development. And I see people in this room who I know feel the same way. So I'd like to thank you, man. How do you judge a tree? A lot of people think that you judge it from the size of its girth, and some people think that you judge it from the beauty of its limbs and its branches. I think that you judge a tree by its fruits.
You better preach.
Listen. I'm sorry. I just wanted to get you straight. This ain't that kind of place. But I said.
Yes, sir.
I see you, and that's what I think about. You dig? So, I just want to thank you for being this tree, and for bringing forth these fruits. Thank you.
Nothing else needs to be said. Thank you all. Thank you all so much for coming out and for being a part of our history. Please watch your emails. Our 30th anniversary celebration will be November 11th. 2022. It's going to be at the Monona Terrace. We're going to open up registration in probably a few weeks. You're here because you're obviously on our mailing list. Please look out for that. It's going to be, we're calling it a big citywide cocktail party. We want to celebrate a big W of just having been here in this community. We want to thank the community for allowing us to serve it. So please, you want to be there. Put that on your calendar, November 11th. It's a Friday night. It's 6 o'clock. I believe just watch your email, and we hope that you and so many others are out. Please feel free to mingle and continue to make purchases at the bar. Mitch and Joseph, I believe that they're going to play a little bit and take us out, and just mingle and say hello to everyone. But again, thank you tonight for being here, and Eli and Jeremy and all the team that's doing the audio stuff. Thank you so much, Eli. Thank you for pushing to make this happen. This was a beautiful event. Thank you all.